How to plot Excel data in Origin. Whether you need good help, a genius writer, a brainy tutor, or a data wizard, Intudo4U has them all. It's like having a research dream team on demand.
All right, let's talk about a chart that you have definitely seen before, probably in a science class or some business report, the box and whisker plot. It's, one of the most common ways to show how data is spread out. But here's the thing, it's also one of the most misunderstood. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on what it is, how you make one, and maybe most importantly, whether you should even be trusting it in the first place.
I mean, seriously, have you ever just stared at a box plot and felt that little bit of anxiety like it's some kind of secret handshake for statisticians that you just missed out on? Well, you are definitely not alone. They look intimidating, but the truth is they're really just built on 5 simple numbers that tell a story about your data.
So let's just break it down real quick. That line, smack in the middle of the box, that's your median, the exact midpoint of all your data. The box itself, that chunky part, represents the middle 50% of your data. The lines stretching out from the box, those are the whiskers, and they show you the full range, from the absolute minimum value to the maximum. And those little dots you sometimes see floating off by themselves, those are your outliers, the real extreme values that don't quite fit in with the rest of the crowd.
Okay, so now we know what it is, let's talk about how to actually make one. And this is where things get, well, kind of interesting, because making a box plot in Excel has had a surprisingly dramatic history. You've got the super simple new way, and then there's the wild, multi-step old way. So if you're using Excel 2016 or anything newer, congratulations, your life is incredibly easy. You just select your data, go to the Insert tab, click that little statistics chart icon, and pick Box and Whisker. And boom, you're done. It's literally a 2-click process. So simple. But if you were working before 2016, there was no box plot button. No. If you wanted one, you had to roll up your sleeves and basically build the entire thing from scratch, piece by painful piece. It was less of a chart and honestly more of an arts and crafts project. First, you had to manually calculate all 5 of those key stats for your data, the min, the max, the median, and the first and third quartiles, using all these formulas. You had to create an entire separate table just to get the numbers you needed to even begin making the chart.
And it didn't stop there. Oh no, you then had to calculate the differences between those numbers, create a stacked column chart, make the bottom part of the stack invisible, add error bars to fake the whiskers, and then manually format the whole thing. It was a clever workaround, for sure, but man, what a huge pain.
So yeah, we can all agree it is thankfully so much easier to make one now. But this brings us to a much bigger, much more important question. Just because you can make a box plot in 2 clicks, does that really mean you should? Because some data visualization experts are starting to argue that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't.
Right, because it turns out this classic, old-school chart is actually at the center of a pretty serious debate. While it's a total staple in statistics, it has some really fundamental flaws that can make it not just confusing, but sometimes downright misleading.
I mean, this quote from DataViz expert Nick Disbartz really just gets to the heart of it. He basically says that after teaching box plots to thousands of people, he's come to the conclusion that they're just poorly conceived and that there are almost always better options out there. That's a pretty strong statement. Disbartz points to 3 big problems. First, they just don't make visual sense. Our brains see that big, thick box and automatically think it's more important or has more data than the skinny little whiskers. But that's not true. Each of the 4 sections represents the exact same amount of data. Second, they force your audience to understand a kind of tricky concept, quartiles. But the third, and this is the biggest flaw, is that they can completely hide what your data actually looks like.
Okay, just look at this example. On the left, you've got 2 box plots. They look almost identical, right? You'd assume the data behind them is pretty much the same, but when we look at the raw data on the right, we see a totally different story. The top group is a nice standard bell curve, but the bottom group, it's bimodal. It has 2 totally separate clumps of data. The box plot totally hides that crucial detail, making 2 very different data sets look the same. That's a huge problem.
So if the box plot can lie to us, what's a more honest way to show our data? Well, fortunately, there are some really great alternatives to show the real story, without needing a 5-minute lecture to explain them.
The simplest one is called a strip plot. It's just what it sounds like. Each dot is 1 data point. It's incredibly honest and super easy to understand instantly. Now, if you have a lot of dots that are all piling on top of each other, you can use what's called a jittered strip plot, which just spreads them out a little horizontally. With these, you can immediately see the shape, the density, and any gaps in your data, all the stuff the box plot was hiding. But look, let's be real. Let's say you have to make a box plot. Maybe your boss insists on it, or maybe you're in a situation where it's the only chart that will work. I've got one last pro tip for you that solves a very common and very frustrating problem.
This exact question actually came up on Reddit. A user had all the summary statistics, the min, max, median, and quartiles, for a data set with over 100 million rows. They didn't have the raw data. So, how on earth can you make a box plot in Excel if you can't point it to the source data?
The solution is just wonderfully clever. You trick Excel. You basically create a tiny little dummy data set that has just 5 numbers in it. Your minimum value, your first quartile, your median, your third quartile, and your maximum value. That's it.
And when you point Excel's box plot chart to this tiny 5-row table, it runs its calculations and poof, it generates a perfect box plot that exactly matches the summary statistics you already had. It's an amazing workaround when you don't have access to the original massive data set.
So, the next time you're about to make a chart, just ask yourself this one question. Is this chart actually clarifying the truth, or am I just following tradition? The goal isn't just to follow the rules, it's to communicate information clearly and honestly. And while the box plot is a classic, sometimes a simpler, more direct chart might just be the one that tells a truer story.
And subscribe now for more amazing videos just like that. Thanks for watching.